Mind and Matter by G. F. Stout. Book 2. The Psychophysical Problem. Chapter 1. The Nature of the Psychophysical Problem. 1. Introductory. The relation of matter and mind may be approached in two ways, which, though they ultimately converge so as to raise common problems, yet at first sight seem to fall apart and to require separate treatment. On the one hand, we may inquire into the relation of minds as knowing, feeling, and willing to the material world as something which they know and are interested in, and which affords a field for their action and a medium of communication between them. We may refer to this as the subject-object relation. From this point of view, what is correlated with the individual mind as the object which it minds is the material world in general, stretching out indefinitely beyond the limits of our own bodies into the immensity of space and of past and future time. From the other point of view, we may take account of its connection with what is comparatively only a vanishingly small part of this vast whole. We consider only its peculiar relation to certain occurrences in the living bodies of men and animals. This is the psychophysical problem of the relation of body and mind. Both lines of inquiry, if resolutely followed up, bring us face to face with issues fundamentally the same and of fundamental importance, theoretical and practical, for our whole view of the universe and of man's place in it. The way of approaching such questions through the problem of body and mind is, in some ways, the more superficial, but it is the easier to start with, and I shall therefore consider it first, taking account of this subject-object relation only, insofar as it may turn out to be directly relevant to the psychophysical. My aim in the present chapter is to determine wherein the psychophysical problem consists. As ordinarily formulated, the question at issue seems prima facie to be purely scientific, and not distinctively philosophical at all. It is supposed to be concerned only with the factual relation of two series of events, or phenomena, one called mental, and the other neural. Do these processes simply go on together and vary concomitantly? Or do they mutually determine each other? Or, again, is one of them entirely dependent on the other? So stated, the problem does not seem to differ in principle from that, say, of the correlation of heat and volume. It is true, indeed, that mental occurrences are fundamentally unlike neural occurrences, and that from the standpoint of physical science, there is no such fundamental unlikeness between diverse material processes. But the unlikeness does not preclude a scientific account of the connection of the two sets of heterogeneous occurrences, for, in spite of their disparity, it is in principle possible to discover more or less regular correlations between them, in the way of sequence, simultaneity, and covariance. But the properly scientific problem also brings us face to face with further questions which, falling outside the province of science, require some sort of answer, positive or skeptical, from philosophy. The disparity of bodily and mental events, though it does not altogether preclude scientific advance, limits it very seriously in principle, and makes it essentially superficial as compared with the actual and possible achievements of the physical sciences within their own domain. Physical science in general, being founded on manifold, relatively independent data, supplied by observation and experiment, has a corresponding multiplicity of relatively independent starting points, each raising distinct questions. Yet, these different questions cannot, in the long run, be fully answered apart from each other. Each, when followed up, finds its answer only in the answers to others, and the answer to each again raises other questions which require to be dealt with in like manner. It is important to add that the propositions of physical science are always more or less hypothetical, and that the degree of their probability depends on the degree of precision with which they answer a more or less wide range of more or less diverse questions arising from more or less diverse and relatively independent empirical data. Thus, the several physical problems are ultimately parts of one problem, and the several physical sciences are ultimately parts of the one science, which seeks to disclose a single comprehensive order of nature, connecting with each other the phenomena of the material world. In this way, physics and chemistry gradually develop towards the ideal of a single continuous system within which special processes and laws are explained as only special cases of more general laws and processes. They are concerned with determinants of certain ultimate determinables, such as motion, mass, and energy, and these determinables are themselves correlated and mutually complementary as essential aspects of the material world in general. The matter of which living organisms are composed is ultimately the same as that found in inanimate bodies, and the occurrences which take place in it are, so far as science can ascertain, psychochemical occurrences. There is, however, a very important difference. Distinctively vital processes take place within a peculiar system of conditions, very dissimilar from anything discoverable in matter which is not alive. The psychochemical events are correlated with each other and mutually dependent in an order which suggests a tendency towards the fulfillment of ends, and is therefore naturally called teleological. At this point, we encounter the question at issue in biology between the vitalist and mechanical views. So far as this question really concerns the nature of things, and is not merely one of method, it may be stated as follows. Are the special laws distinctive of vital processes merely special applications of more general laws, which hold also for the inorganic world? Within the inorganic world, the same system of ultimate laws may yield very different results, as the conditions of their application vary. Thus, the law of gravitation contributes to explain such different facts as the fall of bodies on Earth, the tides, the orbits of the planets, the rise of water in the common pump, etc. According to the mechanical view in biology, the peculiar set of conditions distinctive of vital processes is only an extreme and immensely complex instance of such variations, involving no ultimate laws and no ultimate factors which are not common both to animate and inanimate matter. Hence, for the mechanist, it is at least a permissible hypothesis that life may have developed according to general physical and chemical laws from a previous state of things, in which there were no living bodies. The vitalist, on the contrary, holds that, for those parts of the material world which are alive, laws are operative which, in spite of their special and limited application, are nonetheless ultimate and not derivative. They are held to be ultimate not merely in the sense that it is practically hopeless, owing to the complexity of the conditions, to show in detail how they can be derived from more ultimate universal principles, but also in the sense that by their own intrinsic nature, they are essentially incapable of being so derived. Thus, if the vitalist is justified, there is, at this point, a real breach of continuity in that order of nature which physical science seeks to discover. Its advance in this direction is barred not merely by the complexity of the problem, but in principle. Which of the two parties is right, we need not here consider. What does require to be emphasized is that, in any case, the psychophysical problem is on an entirely different footing. Vital processes, however peculiar in their nature, and however peculiar in the pattern in which they are united with each other, are at least psychochemical. They are, so far, of a piece which material processes in general. Hence, it is at least an intelligible question whether they can, in principle, be accounted for by the same ultimate laws operating under different conditions. But when we turn to the psychophysical problem, such a question not only cannot be answered, but cannot be intelligibly asked. The reason is that psychical occurrences, as involving consciousness, or at least experience, are, in their universal nature, essentially disparate from merely material processes, whether this takes place in living or non-living bodies. Footnote. I am, of course, speaking from the scientific point of view, which excludes the animistic view of nature. End footnote. If we confine ourselves strictly to the point of view of physical science, there is an abstract dualism of matter and mind constituting an unmediated breach in the unity and continuity of the universe. Mental facts unaccountably superadd themselves as foreign and irrelevant occurrences to what is otherwise the one systematic order of nature, as expressed in such terms as mass, motion, and energy, and, in general, of spatio-temporal process. Properly philosophical problems arise when we consider whether this dualism, which for science is ultimate, can be intelligibly accepted as final without further inquiry. As I have already urged, physical science is one partial development, among others, of what I have called the common sense of mankind. It is therefore a baseless prejudice to assume that the last word lies with it, except in questions which properly fall within its own province. It may raise problems which it cannot solve, though, if we take account of what it ignores, they may prove not wholly intractable. As regards the special question of the relation of mind and body, the outlook of science is essentially limited in two ways. 1. In its conception of the body. 2. In its conception of the mind. When we come to treat of the subject-object relation, we shall have to deal fully with the data that escape us from the purely scientific standpoint. At present, I shall refer to them only so far as may be needful, in order to show why the student of physical science, as such, cannot help ignoring them. 2. The scientific view of the body. Each of us has experience of his own body in a way essentially different from the way in which anyone else can have experience of it. This is especially obvious in organic sensations, such as thirst, hunger, fatigue, sexual excitement, and, in general, the bodily excitement inseparable from emotion. Also, in motor sensations, such as are involved in the actions of looking, listening, handling, lifting a weight, eating, waking, strenuous thinking. For each of us, his body, as thus privately experienced, forms an integral part of what he means by himself when he uses the word I, and says, for instance, I am or feel hungry. I am in love. I think hard. I lift a weight. It is not, however, as merely bodily occurrences that such bodily states and processes are apprehended as entering into the being of the self. They are included in self-consciousness only inasmuch as they are experienced as one with the experiencing individual. But an experiencing individual as such is a mind. What we know or seem to know in ordinary self-consciousness is therefore a concrete whole within which mind and body are only abstractly distinguishable as partial factors. It is, however, the mental factor which gives us the whole, the character of being a self or I. Hence, the unity of mind and body, as apprehended in ordinary experience, may be properly called the unity of the embodied self. Footnote. This view is fully expounded and defended in Chapter 8 of this book, and in Book 4. End footnote. This experience of the self as embodied ought either to be shown to be illusory or to be taken as a fundamental datum in any attempt to determine the relation of body and mind. But in approaching the psychophysical problem from the standpoint of physical science, it is ignored or tacitly supposed to be superseded by more adequate and accurate knowledge. The aim of the student of science is to trace the universal order of nature as a system of most general laws, and whatever does not contribute to this end is, for his purpose, irrelevant. Hence, he regards living bodies of men and animals in the same way as he regards other parts of the physical world. The knowledge of them, which is useful to him, is, in principle, of the same sort as he has, for instance, of the chemical composition of water. It must be publicly, and not merely privately, accessible. Hence, the peculiar experience which each of us has of his own body is necessarily left out of account. The data on which he relies are furnished only by external observation. Even as regards his own body, he does not occupy the inner standpoint peculiar to the experiencing individual whose body it is, but rather that of the external spectator. It is therefore entirely indifferent to him whether or not the subject of a mental process in passing through it is in any manner cognizant of the occurrences which he assigns as its physical correlate. On the contrary, these occurrences, as known to him, neither do nor can enter the experience of the experiencing individual. In seeing a tree, I do not see a process in my own brain, and I need not even think of such a process. It is not even necessary for me to know that I have a brain at all. Brain event and mental event cannot be observed together, and they are thought of together only when we are interested in the psychophysical problem. 3. The scientific view of mind. The inevitable tendency of the physical sciences is to assimilate mental occurrences to the physical. This is possible while fully recognizing that they are fundamentally disparate in their intrinsic nature. What physical science is concerned with is the spatio-temporal relations of physical occurrences to each other. But mental events, though they are not spatial, are nonetheless events, and, as such, are related to each other and to physical events in the way of succession and simultaneity. It is in this light, and only in this light, that the physiologist or biologist can consider them. The scientific point of view is marked by the application to both physical and mental facts, the common term phenomenon. The distinction between them is regarded as a distinction between two sets of phenomena. Such a view is utterly inadequate, and, if it is taken to be adequate, is profoundly misleading. It leads to a false opposition of matter and mind as mutually exclusive. If mental facts are simply another set of phenomena superadded to the physical, the fundamental disparity between them implies that they cannot in any way overlap or interpenetrate. It implies that nothing which is physical can also be mental, and that nothing which is mental can also be physical. Now, it is true and immensely important that experience, or consciousness, abstractly considered, is exclusively opposed to extension, figure, motion, etc. It is also true that what is essentially distinctive of mind is experience, so that there is nothing mental where nothing is experienced or experienceable. But if we take the term mental is simply synonymous with experiencing or being conscious, we are arbitrarily narrowing its meaning in a way which is quite inconsistent with its application in ordinary usage and in psychology. The The reason is that we are trying to conceive mind in abstract isolation from what it minds, and mental processes as purely subjective, in abstract isolation from their correlative objects. That physical things enter into my experience inasmuch as I am in any way cognizant of them, interested in them, and actively occupied about them, is not itself a physical fact. And there is a whole system of propositions truly predicable of them, in this aspect of their being, which do not express their physical nature or relations. According to the established meaning of mental in psychology, and in ordinary usage, such propositions assert mental facts. The term mental thus covers not only what is predicable of an experiencing individual, and is therefore, in the proper sense, subjective, e.g., attention, desire, hope, fear. It also covers what is predicable of objects, inasmuch as they are objects for an experiencing individual. I attend to a picture, and it recalls to me a friend who gave it to me, or a landscape which it resembles, inasmuch as it is I who attend. My attention is not merely mental, but, in the strictest sense, subjective. On the contrary, it is the picture as an object attended to which puts me in mind of my friend. It does so because it has been associated with my friend in the course of my past experience. The propositions that the picture is associated with my friend and that it recalls him are sharply contrasted with such propositions as the picture hangs on the wall, or is a watercolor, or has a wooden frame. It really has a wooden frame, whether anyone perceives or thinks of it or not, but association and recall are predicable of it only inasmuch as someone is or may be cognizant of it and interested in it. These are, therefore, legitimately called mental facts. Such words as idea, percept, concept, etc., serve to indicate that we are considering objects in this aspect of their being, i.e., as my objects or yours. We may here, in order to avoid such technical terms as presentation, follow Locke in accepting idea as the most general term of which percept, concept, notion, etc., are special cases. What then is an idea, and in what sense do we say that my idea of the picture suggests to me the idea of my friend? There is only one answer that does not lead us to hopeless difficulties. My idea of the picture is the picture itself. Footnote. Or, in exceptional cases, something which I mistake for a picture. End footnote. As it appears to me, more or less adequately, correctly, or incorrectly, in this or that stage or phase of my life history. It is the picture itself, inasmuch as the picture, while remaining a physical object, is also my idea. Now, when the man of science, in dealing with the psychophysical problem, speaks of the mental occurrences or phenomena correlated with bodily processes, his application of the term mental certainly is not, and is not meant to be, more narrow than its application in psychology and in ordinary language. He is bound to refer to the mental side, whatever does not belong to the body, as part of the general order of physical phenomena. Hence, for him, as for the psychologist, ideas, including percepts, are mental facts. But, from his standpoint, mental facts are simply another set of phenomena superadded to the physical without overlapping or interpenetration. Hence, ideas are for him mere states of consciousness, which may, more or less correctly, represent a physical world inasmuch as they resemble or correspond to it, but are in their own nature and existence quite separate from it. Sensations also, including experienced sensa, as well as the experiencing of them, because they plainly fall outside the physical order, are regarded in the same way, as merely mental. If this were true, it would follow inevitably that we cannot know the physical world at all, as physical science begins by conceiving it. All that we can be cognizant of would consist in representations, falling within our private existence and having no being independent of it. Our own ideas would intervene like a painted screen between us and the physical world, if indeed there is a physical world at all. There would be no way of ascertaining that the supposed representations really are representations of something beyond themselves. Still less would it be possible to get outside the inner circle of our ideas and states of consciousness so as to determine how far they conform or fail to conform to the outer circle of real or objective being. We should not even be able to make a mistake about physical facts. To make a mistake is to believe something real to be in some way different from what it really is. But unless we are cognizant of the real being concerning which the mistake is made, we cannot believe it to be what it is not. We cannot apprehend it wrongly, if we cannot apprehend it at all. Thus, the student of physical science, if he abides by his own standpoint exclusively and consistently, cuts the ground from under his own feet. He destroys the theoretical possibility of physical science itself. 4. Our plan of procedure. It is a fundamental fallacy to treat the scientific way of approaching the relation of body and mind as philosophically adequate. But it would be an error almost equally grave to neglect it. It supplies a whole system of relevant facts which we cannot afford to pass by as if they were irrelevant. In order to see how they bear on the philosophical problem, we shall start provisionally with the purely scientific line of inquiry, setting aside its glaring failure to yield any tenable account of the subject-object relation, and its consequent bankruptcy considered as a theory of knowledge. We shall then see that even if we confine ourselves within these limits, the scientific mode of procedure raises questions which are not properly scientific, but metaphysical. It also raises them in such a form as to indicate a vague and general way the sort of metaphysical assumptions which must be made in order to answer them. This is the ground to be covered in Book 2. In Books 3 and 4, we turn expressly to the subject-object relation, and reach results which support, explain, and define those of Book 2, and harmonize with the common sense of mankind, as considered in Book 1.